Hey, welcome to Overtime, where we take Sunday's message further. My name is Jeremy, and I'm your host. And this is a podcast where we just want to ask the questions that we think that you would ask as it relates to Sunday's message. And as we do so, we hope that it helps you grow in your life and your faith. With that being said, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all of the podcasts that are coming out. Not only that, hit the like button, because when you do so, it helps us help other people. And if you ever have a question about Sunday's content or about Overtime, you can submit those to overtime@npaustin.com, and we will be sure to get to those in future podcasts. So with that being said, here's a quick recap of Sunday, and then we're going to jump into our conversation today.
I think if we were just talking, all of us would say, yeah, man, I've made decisions. I've talked myself into some of the worst, regrettable decisions in my life. In fact, I undermined my future. And not only mine, because this is kind of how regrets work. I undermine those that I love the very most, or at least those that I say I love the very most. What if regrets are preventable? And Jeremiah says to you and to me, he says, the heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure. Imagine if we just paused, but you're going to get ahead of your regrets. And imagine if you paused and then you embraced what's true of you. Not only to know that, but then secondly, to ask a very important question. Am I being honest with myself? Pause. If you're a God follower, I think the thing you owe to yourself is to ask one additional question. What does God say?
So I wanted to ask you about your tattoo.
Okay.
To start off.
Well, go for it. Yeah.
Have you ever thought about getting it removed?
Well, it's funny. My boys ask me that same question. They're like, Dad, you talk about your tattoo like you don't like it. Why don't you just get it removed? And I'm like, well, one, I don't know how much it cost. I have no idea. But if it's like more than $5, I'm out.
You're just going to live with it.
Yeah,
just take it to your grave.
It's fine. And then secondly, I've heard it's painful.
Yeah.
And I've heard it's almost like, I tried to describe it, but I have no idea. I could be lying. And so I told Michael, I was like, have you ever, put your hand over fire and, just held it there? And I'm like, I would imagine that's what it's like. Like, 3 seconds in, you're like, whoo. Yeah. And that's what it's like for 30 minutes or 45 minutes trying to get that sucker removed. So
yeah.
I'm just, if that's the case, but maybe I'm totally wrong and it is like $4 and it's not painful, then I would do it.
But for something to spend $4, you're even spending time on it. Yeah. There's a cost there.
Oh, yeah.
It's like 10 times more expensive and painful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I did have a friend in high school who got a tattoo on their finger and without permission, without asking their parents.
What?
And their parents made them remove it.
What?
Yeah.
Wow.
And it was like a swirly one, and they had like these bandages on their finger for a while. Mm-hmm. I don't know what they use. Chemicals like pull the ink out of your skin or something. But
it looks like a laser. It's like it's like frying your skin and like it may be evaporating the ink.
I really want you to get it removed. And just let me come there when you do.
Yes. Maybe someday. Yeah. Jill doesn't say, Jill's pretty much my standard for a lot of things.
Yeah.
And maybe she's just, there's some things she's just overly sweet about. And I bet you maybe she's like, if she was like, babe, seriously, that's a little bit of an eyesore. Can you do something about it?
Yeah.
And I'd be like, all right. I'll check into it. But
yeah, that's funny.
So far, so good after 23.
Well, it's funny because I think in like over a decade of knowing you, I've seen it maybe twice with my eyes, and you made it like 5 feet large on that big screen this week, and you showed hundreds of people.
I know.
So
yeah, vulnerable moment. You got to have some of those.
Yeah, it leads to connection, I guess, something like that.
I don't know.
Anyways, so let's jump in. So we started off with No Regrets Part 1.
Yep. And
we're talking about regret, and something I said in the run through for the welcome this week was you can no regret is kind of tough to get there, like no regret at all, but getting to the end of 2022 with as little regret as possible is kind of part of the reason, and just our life too.
Sure.
So many people get to the end of their life and they have regret, and we're having conversations about it. And so, you started us off talking about the heart and the heart being deceitful beyond all measure, and the Jeremiah passage and all those things. I want to talk about something that's very true for everybody, and that is that there's always a gap between knowledge and action.
Right.
So a lot of times we can become self-aware, apply everything you said in your message, and even invite God in on it. And we're very aware of where we are deceiving ourselves, but doing something different is very, very difficult to do so. I mean, we know what the right thing is, but it's hard to do it. And so if we're Christians, perhaps we know what God says, maybe we won't even want to do it, but why is that dichotomy there? Like we know it, but that doesn't mean we're going to do it.
Yeah, it's such a layered question, because it's like, why do I continue to eat Oreo cookies when I know it's not like good for me?
Yeah.
And I don't want to.
Well, you can get like philosophical into human nature and all sorts of things with it.
Yeah, and even like, even Paul in the scriptures talks about this. He's like, why do I do the things I don't want to do, and the things I ought to do, those are the things I don't do.
Yeah.
And it's like this. So this has been a human dilemma or tension for a long time. And, I think there's a lot of reasons, and I think some of those, as you said, are more philosophical. I think some of those are much deeper reasons, and they're coping mechanisms, I think, from our childhood. I think they're vows we made, when we were young. I've shared before, one of the vows I made is, I was like 10 or 11, 12, I said, I'll never feel again. I just will never feel again. And so that was a result of a lot of pain I experienced on the other side of trying to share like who I am and be vulnerable, and being met in a very negative way. And that was so painful to kind of expose my heart. So I think there's like layers to that. Like, I do the things I do because I don't know why, but I know it's deep. I know there's something in my past that's like determining. So I think that's part of it. I think the other part is certainly you just don't know what you don't know. I think it's like a trust fall. It's like the idea to go, hey, if you fall, you're going to be caught. Like, unless you're not, and you'll always remember that. But I think, it's like, I don't know what, are they going to catch me? It's all the fears. It's all the insecurity. It's all those things. And I think when you do, this is one of the coolest things, and we talked about it a few series ago. When you do trust Christ, you experience something new. In whatever it may be. It's like, hey, here's what you've called me to do. I know I ought not do this. This is leading to regret. It's building my regret. And Jesus, you've called me to something better over here, but I've just never experienced that. And I'm familiar with this, but over here, if I do that, that's going to come at a cost. And like I said on Sunday, it's going to feel like an emotional death. It's going to feel like I'm not going to give in to what I've always done. I'm not going to satisfy my desires in the way I've always satisfied them. Oh my gosh. And I think because you don't know what you don't know, sometimes that prohibits you from actually doing what Christ has called you to, which, as I said on Sunday, is something far better. And this whole dynamic in Luke 9:23 and 24, and I've referenced this passage quite a bit. It's so exactly what Jesus said. He's like, okay, if you're going to be my disciple, okay, you got to choose that. Are you going to follow me? Like, believing in me is one thing, but if you're going to follow me, then you got to take up your cross daily. Okay, taking up the cross, the imagery of that's hard, that's difficult. I don't want to. That could be suffering. It could be, it's something like I'm kind of dying to something. And then his promise on the other end of that to go, if you take up your cross daily, like if you're willing to do this and follow me, then I promise you, for whoever loses his life for me will save it. In other words, there is something that's so much better on the other side of trusting and following and surrendering to me. But then he says, but you're free. But if you want to save your life, in other words, you're going to go, I'm going to do the things I can control because these are the things I'm familiar with, and I'm not familiar with what's over here. If you're going to hold on to that, then you're going to lose it.
Yeah.
I have something for you over here. And so I think that whole dynamic, and there's so much more to say about that, it's at play. And so it's like, I'm not going to do it.
Yeah. Well, I think it's one of those concepts that Paul talks about in Romans 7, like you referenced. And I want to read this really quick, because for somebody who hasn't read Romans 7 and Romans 8, Romans as a letter itself can be intimidating if you're new to the New Testament or the Bible, but it's one of the most relatable pieces in the New Testament, I think, in terms of just like Christian, non-Christian, everybody would go, yes, that's me, and what he does is he said, let me read this whole section, verses 14 through 20. He says, so the trouble is not with the law, you mean in doing good or bad, for it is spiritual and good. The trouble is with me, for I am all too human, a slave to sin. I don't understand myself, for I want to do what is right, but I don't do it. Instead, I do what I hate. But if I know that what I'm doing is wrong, this shows that I agree that the law is good. So I am not the one doing wrong, but is sin living in me that does it. And then he goes on with this whole paragraph where he uses all these do's, do, and he says, And I know that nothing good lives in me, that is in my sinful nature. I want to do what is right, but I can't. I want to do what is good, but I don't. I don't do what is wrong, but I don't want to do what is wrong, but I do it anyway. But if I do what I don't want to do, I'm not really the one doing it. It is sin living in me.
Yes.
It's like a tongue twister.
Yeah.
But it's also so relatable because I think all of us can go like, yeah, well, we know what's right,
Yeah.
but we don't do it. And Paul makes this distinction between like this sin living in me piece and flesh and spirit. And a lot of Romans 8 is unpacking the spirit, right? Can you talk a little bit about like that distinction there, how Paul talks about it? You know, this basically just summarize, you know, what Paul talks, because it's a pretty weighty couple of chapters,
Yeah.
you know, between the flesh and the spirit and how that kind of plays itself out in our life.
Yeah, I just think, you know, there's a lot of ways to attack it, but the flesh is what I'm familiar with. The spirit is something new. And when you put your trust in Christ, I mean, Paul goes on to say in Corinthians that you're a new creation. Like, go experience what you were designed to experience. Go experiencing something new. What you know is the flesh. What you know is like, hey, evil for evil. What you know is like, hey, I'm going to cope in that way. I'm going to cope with food. I'm going to cope with porn. I'm going to cope with money. I'm going to cope with success. Whatever. You know that. But what you don't know is that you are a new creation. And that there's the very Spirit of God living inside of you, what I said at the end of part 1. And he's called the counselor, the helper. He's called the one who knows the will of God to provide you with something so much better. So, and what you begin to experience, like in Galatians, it says the fruit of the Spirit is love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness and faithfulness and gentleness and self-control. The very things that are going to manifest what Jesus promises, the fullness of Christ in you. Like, you begin to experience something far more better, but you've got to trust him. And that's the battle. That's the battle right there. And, you know, you know, in my opinion, I think you're free. So there's a battle, and then you're free to choose. And this is, again, why I'm like, if you've never experienced it, this is why sometimes it's like, you know, ready, aim, fire, right? Or fire, aim. You know, I'm more of a like fire.
Yeah.
And then you're like, hey, did you aim it? I think so.
Yeah.
But this is sometimes one of those very pragmatic ways, and there's a danger to pragmatism, but this is sometimes where I'm like, just do it. Just like for a week, for, you know, 14 days, for 21 days, just do it and see what you begin to experience. And I think the very Spirit of God is what gives you the power to do it, is what prompts you, is what reminds you, is what gives you the peace to do it and helps you persevere. And that's the coolest thing. Like, when you become a Christian, when you trust Christ, I mean, you're given a gift and you're sealed with the very Spirit of God. So
yeah, I think a lot of people maybe stop following or kind of fall away from following Jesus unnecessarily so, because they find themselves in this dichotomy and perhaps don't quite see how God is like working in them in that spirit side of things, and creates a dissatisfaction with what their flesh has always done, what that, like, you know, darker part of them has always done.
Yeah.
And they get stuck, you know what I mean? Versus like continuing, like you're saying, to trust God, trust Christ.
Yeah.
And watch what he does in them and through them.
Right. Yep. Yeah. And relationships, I think, you know, do something new relationally. Now, this is not a guarantee, but like, hey, bring flowers home. If you haven't brought flowers home in a long time and you're married, you should bring flowers home. Or, you know, chocolate or whatever it is. Like, or send a little sweet, sexy note, you know, and something that you typically wouldn't do. And begin to make those deposits. And all of a sudden it's like, man, I don't do this and I'm not getting this out of this relationship. But sometimes it's the doing that makes the difference. And I think, you know, with Jesus as well, this is why he said, hey, if you're going to, you know, if you're going to say, I'm going to follow you, you really got to follow me, and you got to take up your cross, and it is going to come at a cost. But I'm telling you, the reason why I'm calling you to this is because it's far more loving, far more fulfilling and satisfying, but you have to trust me. And that, as you said, dichotomy is constantly at play, and I think it keeps us in the lanes and the grooves of regret. Yeah,
for sure. So going on to the next question, we talked about pausing. That was your big kind of point on the screen this week. And what are a few habits to have in your life to avoid deceiving ourselves? What things do you have that you would say help you pause?
Yeah, well, I think, you know, I've shared this with you and I've challenged you a couple times on this and over the years. It's like anytime you're thinking about something, right? It's a financial decision, it's a moral decision, it's a relational decision, an academic decision, you know, and, you know, great. You've got opinions, you've got thoughts, you've got desires, you've got emotions. All those you should pay attention to. But then I think I would say two things. Number one is to pray and say, would you be willing to invite God into this? In other words, just like pause and say, God, what do you think? And sometimes that solves the issue right there and brings it front and center. And now you're pretty self-aware of what you should and should not do. And then I think number two is if you're not willing to sit down with somebody who will look you in the eye, who has your best interest in mind, in other words, they may love you more than you love you, and tell you the thing you don't want to hear but need to hear, then I'm not sure it's a really wise decision. And that's where, many times I've said, hey, it's a budgetary thing or a, financial decision or relational decision. I'm like, just go meet with somebody who, has some life experience and is willing to tell you something maybe you don't want to hear. Mm-hmm. And then you're pretty self-aware because, like I said on Sunday, deception is almost impossible to see in the mirror. If you self-deceived, you convinced you of the very thing you're about to do. So you're not really going to see it clearly. But you're going to see it in my life, and I'm going to see it in your life. Mm-hmm. And this is where, Solomon says in Ecclesiastes, man, 2 are better than 1. When somebody falls, you can help them up. And then he talks about even 3 are better than that because, man, I can see what's happening in your life. And if there's enough trust between us and you're willing to invite that, I'm willing to invite that, I'm telling you, that's the magic. That's the self-awareness. And self-awareness, oh, my gosh. You're around self-aware people, it is so relieving. It's so refreshing. It feels fantastic. So I would say those 2 things. Yeah, just before you make a decision, just pray and invite God in. Number 2, just be willing to call, FaceTime, Zoom.
Yeah.
Sit down with somebody and ask them that question.
Yeah. And to take it a layer further, I've heard other friends of mine talk about friends and mentors and even in their marriage, like they'll have some boundaries that help keep them from regret. Mm-hmm. And so like one of them, one couple I've talked to, they don't spend $50 without talking to their spouse. Mm-hmm. So if they're going to spend over $50, they're like, hey, give them a call really quick. Hey, I'm about to spend money on this. Are you good with it? Cool. Okay. Mm-hmm. And that I would imagine those kind of things, like those little like boundary kind of things,
100%.
I would imagine keep them from making decisions. They always know they have to. Well, it's $55. No, it's not really worth it. I don't want to make the phone call.
Yeah.
Those kind of things. One of the things I wanted to ask you about, because you shared this with me a couple of years back, was this document that you have. Mm-hmm. Josh, you're going to have to cut this out. Never mind. I don't want to ask about this. Or maybe I should. I don't know. I was going to, did you read what I wrote down?
No.
There? I was going to ask you about the consequences of moral failure document.
Oh, yeah.
Because that is a document that's like, if I do this, here's what I will regret.
Yeah.
And that to me is this like massive boundary. I just think how many people have done that for their marriage and parenting and like, all those things.
You can ask about it.
Okay. Well, I didn't know if that was a very private document you shared with me.
Well, I'm not going to share like all the stuff, but
yeah.
I'll
ask you to tell me about it.
Okay. We can keep all this in here if you want.
Yeah. Don't keep all this in here, please.
You should keep it all in here for Jeremy.
The evil smile on his face. One of the things that I don't even know where to pick up.
Oh, you're good.
Just pick up wherever you want. I can cut it.
Yeah.
I'm really trying to do it so he has to cut it now.
Yeah.
He doesn't
have to do anything.
Yeah. We're just all looking at you.
Yeah. Okay. One of the things you shared with me a while ago, I don't remember when this was. It had to have been 7 years ago.
It was a long time ago.
Yeah, a long time ago. Was you have this document that basically laid out all the consequences in your family, in the church, with your boys, with Jill, with friends, if you cross certain moral boundaries in your life. Mm-hmm. And this document is probably different for you because of your job. Mm-hmm. Being a pastor, pastors have been made mistakes and there have been massive implications in their life. Whereas if you work at Dell and you make those kind of mistakes, not quite the same implications or consequences. And so, but it is interesting because it's kind of a list of potential regrets if you were to make certain decisions. Mm-hmm. Can you talk more about like the why behind that document and like why that's important to you?
Yeah, the context of the document was marriage, and it was like, if I decide to cheat on Jill, if I decide to cross certain moral lines on Jill and our marriage, what's the consequence? Like legit, think through it. And it was an exercise that I got from somebody that had committed moral failure, and they said here, I think it was 100 things it cost them, and, from the respect of their children, from a legacy that they so desired and dreamed of having as a little boy and all the way as a man, from being able to look into his wife's eyes and see a woman of peace, see a woman who's been loved and valued and felt safe and like a level of trust. And, there's 100 there's probably more that you can write, but the value of that is considering the cost. It's considering it. Like you are more aware, you're more intentional, you're more alert, and you're thinking to yourself, okay, like I can do this. I'm free to do this. But, do I really want that with my sons? Do I really want that with, one of the things you mentioned is, the thing that makes me different, like if I'm a CEO of a company or I'm a lead pastor of a church, the distinctive is character. And I asked a mentor of mine one time at a large church, and it was like, well, what's the difference of moral failure between the two? And it's character. Like, that's what we have. That's our distinctive as a lead pastor, as pastors, is character. And so you lose that, and you lose a whole lot of people in terms of their respect, and a whole lot of people in terms of potentially, exploring the relevancy of Christ in their lives. Mm-hmm. And God's big enough to handle all of that. Like, I'm not anything significant beyond what God can do, for sure. But, like, that's the cost. And just knowing that, I think, with your kids, hey, if I prioritize work over you, what am I going to do to you? I think you should know that.
Yeah.
And start prioritizing that. If I don't learn how to discover my wife and just say, hey, how's your date? And I'm not, that's great. I mean, I'm trying not to be dismissive of that. But if I don't sit and learn how to ask questions, and, I bought a book, like 100 great questions to ask your wife. It's like a book for dummies. I'm like, those are my kind of books. I love them. And I'm like, and then I bought this one, like, jar. It's this like romance jar of romance questions to ask. And I'm like, I don't know no stinking romance questions. And there was like, 200 little like things I could pull out, and I'd text them, and Jill would be like, babe, that's so sweet. And I'm like, oh, I thought of it all on my own.
Does she listen to this podcast?
I don't know. All my secrets are being given away.
Yeah.
But like, those are again, the point of the question was you're far more self-aware. And it just, if you can pause just even a millisecond, a half second, a full second before making some of the most regrettable decisions in your life, it's so worth it. So worth it. So worth it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that.
Sure.
It's interesting. It is more of a fear-based approach to regret. Mm-hmm. If I do this, then this will happen. But, for certain personality types, that can really work. And for others, they're like, oh, no.
It's interesting, like our personalities, and we talk about this a lot, like in teaching for Sunday morning prep. Like I grew up in a much more kind of shame culture. And I'm not saying like your generation didn't grow up in that, but it felt like that was the tactic. Like to get my kids to do what I'm going to do, I'm going to shame them.
Yeah.
And then, and so I'm very familiar kind of more on that negative side. But I do think, kind of the positive side, in light of your future hopes and dreams, what do you hope and dream about? Write that list too.
Yeah.
And go
write
like,
both lists.
Yeah. And then, So any little way to help you make wise decisions. This is why Solomon says, man, in Proverbs, wisdom is supreme. Sell everything to get it. Do whatever it takes to get wisdom. And it leads to what Christ promises you and me.
Yeah. Well, it seems like on both ends of it, it's just intentionality with what you want in life, what you hope for, what you want God, how you want God to kind of show up in your life, and whether that is from a like regret-based or non-regret-based, your hopes and dreams, like just intentionality with it seems to go a long way. Because when you do bump into those moments where your heart is becoming deceitful, you have that thing to pull from that you spent intentional time with. So, last question. Some of us have been repeating or turning back to the same regrets. We believe statements like "I always," or "I'll never be able to," or "That's just who I am." What would you say to someone who has largely given up hope that avoiding future regret is possible?
Yeah, it feels like if somebody gives up hope, I want to hug them, even though I'm an awkward hugger.
You know.
I know, I do. It's just like, I get it, man. I've been there, and I have felt those feelings, but Yeah, I think sometimes, I've said this before publicly, but when you get stuck, you just need new information sometimes. And I think sometimes we really feel stuck. Like I've prayed so many times, God. I have read so many books, I've whatever, and I just keep doing the same old thing. And I wake up the next morning, I feel terrible. And, I think part of that is going to be a whole identity thing that I would, this is why I'm like, hey, sometimes you just need to be hugged and reminded of who you are, because you've overly identified in that area of your life, and therefore, this is who I am. And just knowing that, man, this is where, my counselor was super helpful, reading Psalm 139, every day for 30 days, and that I am fearfully and wonderfully made. I know what I did last night. I know what I did, but that's who I am. I'm fearfully and wonderfully made, that God knit me together in my mother's womb, that, God knows every hair on my head. And all these terms of intimacy, to know I have value and worth and significance in spite of what I've done and in spite of my failures. That's a really good starting place that I would just try to, as much as I could, remind that individual of what God says of them that's more true than what they may feel or more true than the hope that they've lost. And I think if we can start there, it begins to reignite hope again, to say maybe there's a different way. And what you read, like in Romans 7 and 8, I mean, the Spirit is the very one who's going to compel and move and convict and empower you to do things that you could not otherwise do in your own flesh. And so I think like that's so foundational, to be reminded of who you are, to invite God into the process. And then, sometimes it's new information, and this is where it's like, go meet with a pastor, go meet with a mentor, read a book, watch a movie. My counselor had me watch so many movies, it was ridiculous. And like really cheesy movies, about just some old Christian movies. And I'm like, oh, good Lord, that was terrible. No wonder why people are like, anyways, I've digressed. But like, new information can help you get unstuck. And for Jill and I, we watched, there was one movie about marriage one time when we were really struggling. And we both finished the movie, both like were teared up, very emotional. And what we took away from the movie is we had lost the significance of the value of our marriage. It was just, we've grown apathetic. And after the movie, and it was just new information, I don't even remember exactly what it was. I think the whole experience and, just giving up on your marriage, that we just sat there on our couch, just, and we just loved, like, embraced and just said, like, man, we have to prioritize this. Like, it's far more valuable than it. And we had lost sight of that. So, I would say that. And then counseling is always a wonderful thing. Depending on your counselor, and that's always at play with almost anything. But counseling can help you see things, be reminded of things, give you that new information, put you on the other side of somebody who, genuinely has wants great things for you. And so that can help you reignite hope and maybe find a different way to go about doing something you've always done, but maybe now there's a different way, and that's the way forward. That's the new bridge. That's the new, way to like wake up in the morning and feel free. Yeah.
No, that's really good. I think for somebody who is in that place, just to read Romans 7 and 8, I don't know, every day, just open it up and just, ask God to really help, the Spirit kind of sink in and let go of their flesh. My counselor told me one day, and this was a really silly illustration, but when you become a Christian, it's like you've been booting up as a PC your whole life, and this, for any PC person who's listening,
it's not going to work.
Not going to work.
Okay.
But you've been booting up as a PC your whole life, and all of a sudden you're a Mac, but you've been booting up as a PC your whole life. So booting up as a Mac feels clunky, and there's viruses, and there's all the things that come with PCs, and of course it's going to like take some time. But eventually you'll kind of become the Mac, entirely. And that's that idea of the Spirit kind of leading you and guiding you as you walk with Jesus. And Paul also says, like, his grace is, Jesus' grace, not Paul's grace, is sufficient in our weakness. You know what I mean? It's coming to the point of our weakness where we recognize we do have to depend on God. you know, so.
100%. The last thing I'll say as you were talking about that, although I was like, I was feeling a little nervous as you were equating like Max with like the very Spirit of God and Jesus. And,
See, you just can't take it that
I
far.
know. That was way too literal for
Yeah.
me.
My counselor just knows what works for me.
Yeah. See, I'm telling you, they're for you.
Yeah.
There is, the last thing I would say is one of the things is typically when you're really stuck and you want to give up hope, there's a reason for that. There's a reason, and it's back there. It's somewhere in the past. And so as much as you can, get to the place to go, I cannot see it today, but there's a reason. There's something that's connected to my father. There's something connected to my mother. There's something connected to what happened to me when I was 12. There's something I told myself a long time ago. There's something that when I, crossed that line that I opened the door to. There's something I just cannot see, but there's a reason why I'm stuck, and that's not what God has for you. Like God does have something better for you. And I think like those two things may give a little bit of this empowerment or may give a little bit of energy to go do the work of the past. And sometimes your way forward is your way back, and your way back helps you get unstuck so you can be released to what God has for you, when, you move forward. And so just as you were talking, I was thinking sometimes we get stuck. We lose sight of the fact that there is something in the past that actually got us stuck. Like, if you're in a car, you're stuck because your tire's flat, something like that. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
I don't know if that works.
That was a good analogy.
I lost you right there. You're like, dude, that's not good.
And you criticized my Mac PC analogy.
Oh, that's good. See,
I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I know we love one another.
Yeah, that's good. Mm-hmm. Well, anyways, Buck, thank you for being on the podcast, jumping back into 2022. We're going to be going through No Regrets Part 2 next week. I got a little sneak peek. We've been talking through it, and I'm very, very excited. I think it's going to be a really helpful message for a lot of folks.
Yeah.
So, Buck, thank you. And to everybody listening or watching, we will see you next week.
Thank you, guys.